Hello and welcome to Personable, a podcast focused on speaking to the world's best, enabling you to become the best that you can be. My name is Harveybracken-Smith, and today I'm honoured to be joined by Vijay Chattha. Vijay is the founder and general partner at VSC Ventures. He is actually, in fact, one of the first investors in a company called Fizz, Fizz being one of the most recent podcasts I did with founder Teddy Solomon. I'm incredibly excited to start this conversation today, not only to talk about the venture capital landscape, but more importantly, about the nature of storytelling and how important storytelling is throughout life when raising money and when creating a business. So, Vijay, I was wondering if you could take me on the story to what led you to found VSC.
Yeah, thanks for the time today and really excited to be on here. I heard about you first from you interviewing Teddy and Teddy telling me it was one of the more tough questions he's had. And so I was like, I like people that ask tough questions. And so that's how we got in touch. My story is very much about being helpful. I would say that. I started my first company in college, and at the time it was 99, and it was not that different than where we are right now, where there's a lot of exuberance around technology and what it could do. And that was basically the dot-com era. My roommate came back from Microsoft and said, oh, it's all about in the internet. I came back from working at Sony Music in London as an intern and saying, oh, it's all about media. And we kind of joined forces and with some other folks and said, all right, why don't we do something involving like entertainment and technology? We started a company called Philly Tonight. And the idea was to help college kids find out what to do in their city. And we started out of our sort of house in college senior year, and we grew it. We grew it to 14 cities. And we found other people like ourselves, young 20-something entrepreneurs who want to do something cool with the internet. And we built out one of the largest city guides until the dot-com bust hit. And it was hard to raise money. So we sold it. And at that point, I basically was just thinking about what to do next with my life. And one of the things that we've discovered was my co-founder wanted to keep building startups. So he moved to San Francisco. And we always sort of had the challenge of like breaking through the noise. Very relevant today, right? How do you get people to pay attention? There's so many announcements, so many people talking. Some people are sort of announcing things every day. It's very crowded, but awareness is one of the keys to driving influence and driving action towards any business or idea. So I started helping him with his new startup, and that led to more and more founders reaching out to me saying, how can you help me with my storytelling? How can you help me get publicity or awareness? And we found a niche in this, which was most people that were in the world of, let's call it PR communications. Most of them were not coming from a world of tech or understood technology that well. And many of them had never been entrepreneurs. So there was a disconnect between comms firms of the 2000s and the entrepreneurs building things. And in fact, that divergence became even more quantified and widened as more deep technology ideas came to market. So basically, the more STEM the idea, the harder it was for those founders to really communicate as a complicated technology, whether it's biotech or hardware, robotics, or even when you're looking at some of the stuff with AI right now, it's really hard to grok what this means. So there's needed to be like an intermediary, like a non-STEM partner that can help you take your idea to the masses. And we kind of fell into it. So that's how I started VSC. Actually, my buddy who was my first client said, you should start a PR firm. And I was going to go back and get my MBA. I was like, PR firm? Like, what is that? And I ended up doing it. And so one led to the other. And now we've reached 1,000, founders that we've impacted. And we've driven 22 unicorns and 4 IPOs. So it's been a great ride. And then in that process, my wife and I started angel investing in some of the cooler companies that we liked. And we started investing into venture funds because we're very curious about how VC worked. And then in 2021, we started our own first fund, $21 million fund, which is investing seed stage. And in that fund, we're just looking for areas that are being like basically forgotten by Silicon Valley right now. So we call them dirty, dusty, and dangerous industries or dirty jobs. So where's the rest of America going to prosper by using technology? How can physical AI play a role to make workers' lives easier, whether they're working in recycling or they're installing solar panels or they're doing those tough jobs, or they're police officers that are using AI now to solve crimes faster. So I'm taking everything we've learned from Silicon Valley, but applying it to industries that seem to be like forgotten or workers that seem to be forgotten.
You mentioned that initial idea with those, Philly Tonight with that nightclub app. Was the intent always to become an entrepreneur and to enter this startup world? Or was it more you just had an idea for something that was initially a fun idea and it kind of evolved into this thing that was actually more of a thing?
Yeah, never. The word entrepreneur was not even really a thing back then. Like we didn't even know what that meant. But so I was assuming I was going to go work at some consulting firm or, banking firm or something because I went to Penn and that's kind of what everybody did. And so, but what happened was in '99, it was this interesting time where you could go the commercial route in banking or consulting and be the lowest person on the totem pole and then spend the next 20 years trying to have a senior job. Or you could become the founder of an internet company, become the CEO at 21 automatically with no experience and no traction. And I was like, well, this sounds fun. Like, I don't know how long this window is going to be open. Let me try to go do this because the worst case scenario, I go back to the lab and go back up the corporate ladder. But maybe there's a moment here to do something different. So I honestly never thought I was going to be an entrepreneur or at least something that early in life. I was thinking more traditional, like some sort of executive in a big company. But, and like my dad says, once you taste entrepreneurship, you never go back. It's so true. It's really hard to go back to that life once you get a taste of running your own thing.
You mentioned that sort of limited window, and I'm definitely going to get his name wrong, but I believe he's on Shark Tank, and he's called Kevin O'Leary. And he makes a lot of content online nowadays. And I can recall seeing a video of his in which he basically said that if you've already got a Harvard degree, why are you becoming an investment banker? Why are you becoming a consultant? You don't need that brand on your resume. You already have that through Harvard. Go and start something and people will back you. I know Harvard's a rare example because there aren't that many people that went to Harvard. But at the same time, that sort of underlying message still holds true and that you already have the support of people. Do you think that's generally true? Like, do you think founders within college should go and start their own businesses? Or do you think having a bit of experience is a good thing to do first?
The experience you can get now is with internships. The experience you can get now is to be a hacker and build something over the weekend. You don't need to go, you don't need to spend several years somewhere. I think there are two paths, Harvey. One would be like, just go be an entrepreneur. And I just say fail fast, right? Build stuff, see what works. Nobody's ever built something and every one of their products and ideas has been successful. You only hear about the successful ones. Right. But there's 90% of them. It's like an iceberg, right? 90% are actually underwater and never took off. So the most successful entrepreneurs I've ever met are ones that just got out there and started doing stuff. There's entrepreneurs in building business in high school. Like actually I had my first business was a DJ business. I had a band with my friend and we'd go and do like bar mitzvahs and Indian parties and we DJ'd. So I was like already like a mini entrepreneur. So I think you just go for it in life. And the reality is it's better to fail earlier in life than later. Like it's harder later when you have either children or a spouse or just like a mortgage, but it's like, and all the lessons are learned through failure too, right? Like you can learn some lessons by succeeding, but you learn a lot of lessons by failing. And those are in entrepreneurship. I don't know if you can read in a book, like you just got to go. And it's funny and I tested our Philly Tonight business in Wharton's entrepreneurship class and the professor gave us a C and I was like, that sucks. And then we ran out and raised money and we were celebrating at this like nightclub, our funding announcement and everything. And I was cheering. I was like, that professor was wrong. See, he was wrong. We're an A. And then obviously went out of business like 2 years later. I was like, okay, maybe the professor was right. So I think use university as its own incubator, right? An accelerator and go for things. And I think the other thing is like you learn a lot about human relationships, which is very hard to learn, but you have to do it. Which is how do you work with people? How do you work with co-founders? Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. How does everybody do the same amount of work? Is everybody in it for the same reason? Is it a hobby for some? Is it like a tourism for others? How committed are your partners? I think you learn a lot about human dynamics that it's good to learn early because at least for me, I learned that like I have a tough time working with a lot of partners. I like working with a small group because part of entrepreneurship is just kind of doing your own thing. But I also work with so many founders too, right? They're my clients or they're my investments. So like what is that like specific dynamic that works best for each person? Figure that stuff out early in life, right? Because it gets complicated later. Like starting a company with a founder at 45 and you guys are in different parts of your life, maybe different financial net worth, maybe you can take different risks. All that chemistry matters. And it's why it's important to be thoughtful about it. And the later you get in life, the more it's like everything feels riskier, right? And the earlier everything feels easier. So I do feel like, at least in America, because of bankruptcy law and things like that, if you make mistakes, you can bounce back. And actually, some of those things are changing in other countries. But like that's what America's for, I think, is to basically try big ideas. And the worst case scenario in many cases is you have a couple of years, you have to kind of like regroup yourself and start over, or go work at a company and earn some money and then peel out again. But that's sort of my long-winded answer to say start early and fail fast.
I think an interesting sort of landscape in today's investment world, and it's much more obvious than it was, say, 5 years ago, is the fact that you don't need to be profitable to be successful and get high valuations. Like an example of that, I'm actually in an entrepreneurship class at the moment, believe it or not. It's quite funny. But you look at Uber, for example, that haven't, I think they might be profitable now, but weren't for years. And their primary metric was, what market share do we have? How many rides are we carrying out? You look at like FanDuel and you look at DraftKings, two of the biggest sports betting companies in the US, and the metrics for success there are actually how many bets are placed, what's the size of the bets, who has the most of the market. So flipping it back to that, what were your primary metrics of success? How did you technically build out such a great website, app, and was it profitable? What deemed it as successful? Or were investors always looking at potentially being successful or potentially having more users?
Yeah, so let's talk about some interesting myths to bust and facts about entrepreneurship and venture, right? So the first I would say is that venture capital is not for everybody, right? Venture capital is effectively like cocaine, right? You can use it and you can get some performance out of it, but first of all, it's not for everybody, and you could die from it. And many more companies have died from overfunding and from the model of how venture capital works than have succeeded. I think the biggest thing I've learned is like most of the successful people in this country, take out the top people that we all read about, a lot of entrepreneurs are unknown people that are bootstrappers and they're making tens of millions of dollars. And I always think of like, when I go like look at like a Duke basketball game or Alabama football game, like who are all these boosters? Like Mark Zuckerberg didn't go to Alabama. Like who are all these boosters? They're small businesses. They're people that run businesses like, beverage distribution or car dealerships. And I'm like, these people didn't necessarily need to go to Ivy League school. They didn't need venture capital. They probably built it from scratch, or they took over their family business, whatever it is. Like, I kind of really believe like venture capital gets way more media coverage than it should be supporting companies. Only a small group of companies in America ever get venture capital. And of those, I'd still say half of them shouldn't have even taken venture capital, right? So I just want to I think this whole idea that VC drives innovation is, for certain companies, it works. But if you really think about it, that's not the best thing for a founder. What if you want to build it slower? What if you don't want to give up so much ownership so quickly? And what if the investors really don't know anything about building your business and give you the wrong advice, right? These are all the things that we see too often. I see too often in my business. And so back to your point, so on starting a business, my thing, the KPI would be, I think profitability does matter. Like even if you're B2B, go get some customers that are willing to pay you and try to run your business that way. Also, venture capital is trendy. It could be hot right now for AI, but it could be dead for healthcare right now. So when you actually need to raise the money, the VC decided, that's not cool anymore. I'm not putting any more money in. You want to have leverage there and be profitable, that you don't need their money. The best founders actually are building a good business with solid metrics of growth or profitability or revenue. And then when the VC market is like salivating over their space, they take money at the right valuation, but they're not desperate for the money, right? They're taking it because it's free money or it's easy money, or they could grow faster, or they could buy other companies. But I think the Uber model is honestly to me is really like a sort of lightning in a bottle strategy. You had a serial founder in Travis, okay? You had a fundamental and new opportunity in consumer to shape the way we transfer ourselves. And you had capital that was basically free. It was the interest rates were low. So they just raised tons and tons of money, and they were great salespeople at raising money. And it was about market share. I think and that gets a lot of press attention, by the way, Harvey. Like a lot of people your friends, my friends, we read about those companies. There's a higher chance of failure than, look, he got kicked out of the company. Because once you have other people that own a stake, then you're not in control anymore, right? So these are the perils, I think. So I actually believe that the faster you can get to break even, the more control you have over your business and the more successful chance you have of succeeding, better chance of success.
Yeah, because a common I don't know if it's a misconception or a contradiction to that point of view, is I've often heard from founders, or at least speaking to them, that they wouldn't chase profitability because that hinders their other goals of growth in terms of like getting users. To what extent would you say that's true?
Well, look, consumer is different, right? Like if you're mentioning companies like in consumer social media, I think you're right. It's about gaining users. It's about building scalable technology so that when you do decide to turn on revenue, you could turn it on at scale. I think that's right. I mean, I would say probably Fizz is a good example of that, where focus on your audience, build what they want, keep building, keep listening, keep learning, keep iterating, and then you can turn on monetization. That's what Facebook did. That's what other platforms, I would assume TikTok is in the same category. So for consumer, I think it's right. First of all, it's very few consumer companies that have actually even raised a Series A or Series B in the last 2 years, right? There's been very few. We've just been in a different era. It's almost like the last era ended, and then there's a new AI app era coming. But we've been in this middle ground, and it's been kind of hard to find like where can you build a consumer product with scale. I think Fizz has done it because they focused on college kids, and there wasn't really a market that was being attended to, right? Reddit was like further along, and then like it's hard to build things for younger people under the age of like, whatever, like so 12 or something. So I think you can find those moments, but there's going to be a lot more companies coming now, Harvey, because the AI infrastructure is there. So generative AI companies are going to come out. You're going to see a lot more companies, I think, now. So yeah, you're right. Like in consumer, you want to grow and you want to show sustainable growth. You want to show, like, you also want to grow without spending money on advertising. Like we didn't talk about that yet. Uber grew, had a word of mouth part, but a lot of their venture capital went towards advertising dollars, right? How much of their money went right out the door into Apple and Facebook's pocket? It was a lot. I don't know if it was like 70 cents on every dollar they raised. That's also troubling, right? You want to build a business that has more of a virality to it in its core versus like trying to buy app downloads, which is what they had to do back then.
Last point on the initial business that you built. How did you go about getting noise for that app? And then how is that transcended into consistently trying to help founders break through the noise, as you put it today?
Yeah, I mean, at that time, the first like hook for many people is you're the first of its kind, right? So we were the first online city guide. We spent a lot of time passing out flyers. We threw parties. To go to the party, Harvey, you had to register on the website. So that was a great way to get people on the platform. Our email newsletter was actually probably more engaging than our website because people have to go to the web. Instead, you get the newsletter. So that was another thing we learned is like a newsletter is actually a better distribution channel than the website. We needed a website, but like people just don't have time to always click back to the site. So pushing content, and actually pushing content became my founder's next company. He did it for mobile. So he was pushing content through SMS. And so that was another like thing we learned about how to grow it. But like that was a lot of it. We spent a little bit on advertising, but really the other thing was like finding promoters that would use our ticketing capability as the proprietary way you could get into the event. And then that forced them to be registered on the site. And that actually we learned later in this whole business was really the only revenue model was ticketing. Like in nightlife was ticketing. And actually it's hard because there's a monopoly. Ticketmaster is effectively a monopoly. There's some secondary sites now, I know. But back then, like nightclub events weren't on Ticketmaster. They were too small. But when you get to like tier one artists, you couldn't crack that. So you're trying to build a business in this like sort of like nightlife DJ art culture that was never, it was too popular. You wouldn't be able to do the ticketing. So you had to be like, but popular enough that people would buy the tickets, right? So it's kind of like this long tail that we were trying to go after.
What does the PR world want, and how do you go about dealing with all the different, stakeholders in that sense? So you've got the founders, you've got the businesses behind them, you've got yourselves, you've got the people writing the articles about them or conducting the interviews, and then you've got the businesses themselves. How do you go about making every one of those parts happy, and where does it fall in terms of a pecking order of importance?
Yeah. So I'd say, first of all, nobody's happy right now. Founders think that everything that they talk about, every new AI app update should be covered in the Wall Street Journal. Journalists are like overworked and understaffed. And if you look at the headlines the last 2 years, there's been over 3,000 media layoffs, right? And on top of that, getting attacked by the president, all the richest people in the world either own the newspapers or attacking, quote, legacy media. So to be a journalist right now is to be a underpaid, overstressed attack by the political parties that they are either biased or what have you. To be a journalist is like one of the hardest jobs right now, I'd say. So but then we think about, what do they want, right? What do they want? They want to tell the stories that matter to their readers, and they want to be first to tell the story. So sometimes the way we work it is like, if we have a founder, we try to find an exclusive. Find one reporter that will be the only person that breaks the story. So that way we're kind of like in the middle, helping the journalist discover something, like break it, be the first to discover something, which is good for their reputation and gets traffic to their article, but also help the founder find a place for their story to come out. I think that's like one of the best ways to like find something that works for both sides. That's probably the number one thing I think I've learned, is like make it work for both, right? The second part is like media has like exploded in terms of like non-traditional media. So podcasts like this, creators on social. And so on some level, while I said there's 3,000 journalist layoffs, there's also 1 million new creators in the last couple of years that are talking about B2B stuff, not just like consumer. So there's actually more people that you could talk to if you're a founder. But it's just like how to reach them. It's fragmented. How do they work? Do they want to write about it? Do they want to make a video about it? Do you have to pay them? Do you not? That world is like Wild West right now.
How does the system work behind the scenes? You talk about these billionaire, founders that own these companies, as well as the influence politically, even from Donald Trump down, talking about fake news. But how many strings are there behind, and how much influence is there with regard to blocking certain things, or pushing certain narratives behind the scene? Because I think for the average person, they just like, oh, it's just a newspaper. When actually there's so many complexities with relationships, with politics, with influence that are actually going on behind the scenes.
Yeah. So when I started this in 2002, I truly have this belief that a lot of the tech media and business press are in it to tell stories, right, to their audiences. And I haven't found the bias that a lot of these people talk about so often. Now, there's clearly bias between people like a Fox News maybe and an MSNBC. That's clear to me, right? But when people attack something like CNN, I don't know if I believe it. CNN was the first one to go after Biden for his terrible performance in the debates and basically call for a new candidate. If CNN's in the pocket of the Democrats, they wouldn't have done that. Like when you really analyze it. But it's true. Like if you want to go for a right-wing story, you go to Fox News. Like I'll give you a good example of one. We did data reports on how small business were doing in places where there was a lockdown and there wasn't a lockdown, right? So in that case, Florida's business were doing great, right? California's were doing poorly because we had all these lockdowns. You remember all these days. Fox News loved that story, right? Because that was all about their agenda was to open things up. They weren't into the masks. That was sort of the Trump approach. And so they loved that story. And then in other places like where, the other side of it, which is weird, is that some cities just like to beat themselves up, which I don't even understand. But for most of the time, San Francisco press, all they wanted to write about was how shitty San Francisco was. It's like everybody's writing about how shitty San Francisco is. Why would the local newspaper just feed into it, right? So there's just the weirdness of it. So each outlet, you have to first ask yourself who owns it, right? Secondly, you got to just read the articles and ask yourself, what's their slant, right? Like Washington Examiner, Republican. Washington Post, probably Democrat, even though Bezos is pretty down with Trump right now. But just you'll see the articles and you can tell. So I think a lot of our job is to help founders understand the differences, right? And sometimes like we have companies in robotics where the end user is people that live in like small towns in Washington State or Idaho. And, they've founders have said to me, Vijay, I don't want to be in TechCrunch. I don't want to be on, CNN. They're going to hate me. If I'm in the New York Times, it's like I'm the devil. Like we need to get onto Fox. We need to get on News Nation. We need to get into places where they respect. So like also the audiences and where they see companies or discover things, it matters, right? And because people form an opinion about a company and their services based on who covers them.
Yeah, I did politics in high school, and I would often look at the US and look at the divisiveness, and it was pretty obvious that certain media were trending further right and further left, and now it's pretty entrenched. As you mentioned, who's on what side. But in the UK, it seemed less strong. Obviously, you had like papers like the Sun, where it was pretty obvious where they stood, or the Daily Mail. But for the most part, places like BBC or Sky News, especially as a kid, like I always kind of viewed it as impartial media. But I feel like as I've gotten older, they've also become more divisive in the stories that they tell, how they tell them, who they're willing to talk to, who they're not willing to talk to, and how other media portray what they're like. How, as a sort of PR sort of specialist and someone very within the VC world, I mean, you've just talked to that with regard to founders, but the decisions the founders make affect the businesses that they work, that they run, which affect society in some way. I think there's, tens of millions of people in the US work for small businesses, in fact. So how do we go about working and dealing with and understanding this influenced media, not just from a higher level of people like yourself that have gone to Ivy League institutions, but all the way down for people that aren't as critical about what they read?
Okay, this is the $1 million question, right? So the first thing you said is you nailed it, which is critical thinking is the most important thing we could teach our children is to understand bias, information, disinformation, and make their own judgment on things, right? That's number one. Number two, how do you navigate something where everybody was against Trump in 2016? The tech company CEOs, the platforms, and now they're all standing right behind him at the inauguration. How do you navigate that as a founder? Like all you do, you look up after you're working and you're like, wait, everything just changed. These people are on that side, these people are on this side. Well, like what happens? This is the problem right now is the world is changing so fast that I think really what it comes down to is like, who is the audience you need to reach? What are they engaging with? By the way, they may not be reading the Wall Street Journal anymore. They may be following this one guy on TikTok who's got the best financial news. That just takes experimentation and engagement. Like I'm constantly telling my team, spend time on these platforms, read people you respect, survey our customers and survey our customers' customers. What do you read? How do you make decisions? Where do you go to make decisions? Who influences you? Who do you follow? Another like a little hack, Harvey, like I could go to your LinkedIn right now and I can see what groups at the bottom you follow. So I already know what you're into, right? I can see who our contacts are. So I already know who you respect, right? That's like a micro example of how you can analyze a customer, right? How do you do that at scale? It's very difficult, right? But I would go with the gut. If you're like a founder and you like certain media and you think your people that you want to engage with are also following that, you should be there, right? Find a way to be engaged there and find an angle that's relevant to that person's interests. But I would say that like the rules feel like they keep getting rewritten. And so what I would have told you 2 years ago wouldn't fit today. And also it always goes back to two things. Who owns the media company? Okay. Because remember, Mark Benioff from Salesforce owns Time. Michael Bloomberg owns Bloomberg. Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post. Rupert Murdoch owns the Wall Street Journal, right? Who owns these things and what does that play a role? And some of them are hands off, right? I mean, despite what people will say, even like Rupert Murdoch, he let Fox call Arizona for Biden. The first channel to call Arizona for Biden was Fox News. So in many cases, the billionaires are not putting their finger on the scale. In some cases, they do. Very difficult to navigate. So critical thinking, number one. Number two, realize that political waves shift. And it seems like the newest thing we've learned is that like capitalism still is the number one rule of law. So people that were standing on their social justice platform 4 years ago are bending the knee right now.
I think it's interesting when you say like look at what people are consuming, because it seems simple, like, oh, you want to know how someone thinks, see where they're thinking it from and see what they're consuming. But I don't think it's a thing that people would actually think about going about and doing. So like I feel like a lot of the older generation, for example, think that, oh, well, these kids, they should be consuming traditional media. But then when you look at the viewership of something like CNN or even like Fox News, which might be like 1 million or low millions versus something like TikTok or someone like KSI who has tens of millions of views on every single video they put out. The way that media is being done and how the influence happens is completely changed. Like, for example, there's a news page on TikTok, a guy called Dylan Page, and he is the only account that KSI, who's a big YouTuber, follows on TikTok. He has 15 million followers, and he creates news he creates news content which get millions and millions and millions of views. So if you were to wonder where does Gen Z get their content from and what are they consuming, that's an example of it. They're not consuming, as you said, the CNNs or even the Fox News.
100%. Like the one of the beauties of having children is my kids tell me what's happening, what they're into, where they find things. I knew Trump was going to win the election by July because the young kids in my son's class were telling me what they were seeing on TikTok. And Trump was winning. But why did Trump know about TikTok? Because of his son, right? So Barron told him to go on the podcast. So I think we learn a lot from young people about where things are going. I think the best consumer VCs are either young enough that they're using the products or their kids are on the products. And I think if you're understanding storytelling, you got to understand what young people are into. And that's always been that way with fashion, music. Young people set the tone and everybody else follows. So yes, this is the opportunity though, right? If you're building a brand, find the new platform where everyone's on and build your brand there first before everybody else follows, right? Before Nike's there and New Balance and Disney, be there early. What's the next TikTok, right? Is it Fizz, right? Be there early because if everyone's going to go there, you have this window where you could dominate your mind share there before it gets noisy.
So I'm 20 now, and when I first became interested in investing, I was literally like 13, 14 years old. And I knew, I won't say his name, but I know like a successful hedge fund manager. He has his own hedge fund. And what I find interesting is I used to resell clothes at the time, like Supreme and various sneakers. And that was my own micro business that did pretty well. But what was so interesting is that it didn't just feel like I was asking him questions with regard to, how to invest, but he seemed genuinely invested in me and interested in what I had to say about what I was interested in. So I remember speaking to him about Yeezys, with Kanye West, with Adidas. And then I'm pretty sure he may have made a pretty successful investment in Adidas following, Yeezy, and probably not just a conversation with me, but at least that opened his mind to I'm a 13-year-old kid. I'm interested in this thing called Yeezy. He's like, Yeezy, what the hell is that? Does his due diligence, realizes that the sales are doing really well. Lots of kids know what's going on, but actually the older people don't. And so he's always given me the advice of invest in things you're actually interested in. And every company I've ever been interested in since there's often been a correlation between that and what's done well. And so I think it's gold standard advice.
Isn't that the easiest, like the most basic way, right? Whatever you're interested in was probably going to be a good thing. So I love that. There was an app, by the way, they would check your credit card receipts and automatically invest for you. It's called Griffin. That was just a cool idea, right? Like, why not buy the stock? If I bought Tesla when I got my first Tesla in 2012, I'd made millions on that, right? Yeah, but I didn't because my dad's like, oh, I don't know about this guy. The auto industry's tough. What if he fails? He needed a loan from Obama. What my dad was saying, who was at that time in the 60s, was influencing me buying a stock. If I just bought the stock with an AI automation based on my credit card receipt, probably done well.
Yeah. What do you think makes a successful versus an unsuccessful, PR agency?
What's the difference? Getting coverage. That's it. It's a harder answer to that, but there's a lot of firms that spend a lot of time on things that don't actually result in an outcome. But there's two types of PR. There's offensive and defensive, right? Offensive means you get publicity and you create value. Defensive is you're a big company like Meta. You don't need much publicity. You're trying to stay out of the news most of the time. Defensive. And of course, sometimes you want to make news. You got some new Ray-Bans or whatever. Maybe Palantir wants to be in the news every now and then, but not always, right? So offensive and defensive. And the bigger the company, the more risk there is to have any publicity, right? By the way, there's massive multi-billion-dollar companies right now, maybe like BP Oil. They don't want any press. They actually pay a lot of people to keep them out of the news. So a good agency understands if they're playing offense or defense, and when they're playing what, and is able to achieve a result for that. For startup PR, it's so hard to get coverage unless you're really doing something super cool. And even then, it's hard to get consistent coverage. It's hard to get people to write about you more than once, right? Or besides when you get funding, PR or something like I raised 50 million or 100 million for this company. So that's kind of how we measure ourselves in the early stage is like, can you help a company get out there between their funding announcements? Then that means you're a level above, right? If you can go even further and be more consistent, or you can come up with something creative, like one of the most creative things we started with was these data reports on mobile trends. Where's Nokia's being used? Where's iPhones being used around the world? What ringtones are most popular? What games are downloaded the most? Based on the clients we represented, like those platforms. And that got press every month. And that was an award-winning idea because we didn't need a new funding announcement and we didn't need a new product, but we're always in the news. That's like the highest level, Harvey, of like PR eliteness, is when you can create something, a program that keeps you in the news all the time.
On that idea, you've had 3 IPOs, 7 unicorns, 46 exited startups. You've obviously done very well. So how have you gone about keeping your businesses in the news the whole time?
Well, we have a great team now. So I went from being a solo practitioner to now having multiple partners, all having, decades of experience. So it's hard to scale people, but in our world, we've built a good culture. One of the big parts of our culture is, no assholes. We don't work with founders that could be successful, but are just going to drain us. The second is we have a work from anywhere philosophy that we shouldn't force people back into offices. And by the way, this whole return to office is maybe good for federal workers and building businesses and we're iterating in person. But when you do what we do, which is really services, work from forcing people back into office makes it really hard for women to work and women with families to work. And so we actually go the opposite direction. Work from anywhere, be your best. And trust me, like if you're not getting covered, you're not getting results, we know, right? All of our work is very transparent, whether we're delivering or not. But we've taken a different approach to culture, which has paid off. People want to work for a company that lets you be your best self and be creative and also be able to have a backyard and not live in up in New York, or be able to pick up your kids from, soccer practice and live your life. So scaling team, hard to do. I think we figured that out. Giving them a culture in which they're going to thrive, second most important part.
As a startup, flipping your cap to the life of a founder, how do you go about choosing the right VC to work with?
It's a really good question. So first of all, when it comes to founders, I give the opposite advice. Build together. Virtual building, it doesn't work. You got to move fast and you got to iterate and all those things. So I think being in person is critical when we make investments. 2, picking the VC. Look, by the way, when you raise money, you also can raise from multiple investors. One's going to be your lead, and then you could have some other investors in your cap table. The first thing of identifying the lead would be, is this somebody you're going to be able to talk to through thick and thin, right? Everybody's going to be your friend when your business is going well, but inevitably in startups, which you already know, it's already an 80% failure rate or maybe 90%, you're going to have somebody that's going to have your back. Very hard, because they have to, their stakeholders are LPs. Those are investors into the fund, but you're going to have to make sure you work with someone who you believe is going to be there for you on both sides. I think the second biggest thing is, do they have the ability to raise more money for you? So founders have to go fundraise, but a lot of the time the VC is opening the doors, right? So it's a constant fundraising game. Once you start taking venture capital, you're going to keep raising money, most of them. There's very few examples where you just raise 1 or 2 rounds. Most of the time you're on a hamster wheel now and you're going to do 5 or 6 rounds or more. Can they help you get to that next level of funding? Can they help you get your next investor that joins the board? Are they good at selling their companies up the next layer? What's that hit rate look like? You need to know if they're good at that. And are they good at that, or is just the brand name of their firm good at that? That's the other thing, right? You're not necessarily just buying the name of the firm. You're buying that individual who's working with you. So understanding if that partner as a person has a good reputation matters. And also, by the way, are they entrepreneurial? For me, I would only want to raise money from someone else who was an operator. That would be if I had it my way, because I want to know that they went through what I've gone through. By the way, 50-60% of VC is financial people. And some of the most successful VCs have never run a company per se. I think it matters for me because I want them to be empathetic to what I'm going through and also give me relevant advice because they've themselves built something. And the last point on that, like, I would like them to have built something recently. Like, if they're giving me like ideas from the 90s, you know what I mean, that are not relevant, that's almost as destructive as giving me no advice. So I would want them to be building stuff recently, or they have other portfolio companies that they're in the weeds with, they're building with, and they're kind of like a company builder. They're learning stuff from that one and they're applying it to yours. I love that kind of a sort of an investor, lead investor.
We were talking about at the start of the podcast about how the big money raisers were what made the news, or the successful VC investments. And so from an outside perspective, it is made to seem like VC only works out successfully. But as both you and I know, something like for every one successful investment there are, it's probably 5 or 6 that are like, and then there's many others that are not successful. I mean, it's that the power curve or something like that. I don't know if I'm getting that name
Power
right.
law, yeah.
Power law. On that sort of point, and I hate to pick on a certain business, like Andreessen Horowitz, for example, one of the most well-known or successful venture capital firms. It doesn't have to be about that. I was wondering if you could talk to any horror stories you've heard in the VC landscape, and sort of, bringing it down and humanizing VC a bit, and showing that it's not all the Metas or the Amazons or the Googles of the world, but actually there are, for every one of those, there's 20 more that aren't successful. Like you said, it's like cocaine. It's either really good or really bad for those businesses.
Yeah. Look, there's 2 different stats that matter. One is most startups are not going to make it, right? Majority will fail. Secondly, which is more of a newer phenomena, a lot of VCs won't make it. A lot of funds have not even returned 1x yet. And if the funds raised in like the times of the 2021s and they deployed into companies that were overvalued, many funds are not going to make it, right? And so not only are there a lot of startups, there's a lot of VCs. And so the idea that VCs are all rich and have made it is just a fallacy. I think a lot of emerging managers, which are like first-time funds, they're more or less like entrepreneurs themselves. They're gritty, they're gutty, they're gritty. They're like consultants. They're trying to help founders build a business, and hopefully they'll turn a profit themselves. Maybe they'll get more money to back more startups. The typical venture fund that's seed is making like 34 bets. They're probably expecting like 2 of those to be 100x. That means like the rest of them are either going to be flat or maybe return 1x or go out of business. So nobody promotes their failures. That's the funny thing, right? And by the way, a lot of the bios, maybe even mine, I don't have every failure, right? On there, it'd be like 900, right? So why? Because maybe that makes LPs nervous about giving a venture fund money. Maybe that makes founders nervous. Hey, this investor has had a lot of failures. I don't know. But the other side of it is, this investor did Stripe and Uber. Oh, I could be the next Stripe and Uber, right? So you only keep the 2 brands on there, the ones you want. But if you do that at scale and people do that everywhere, you only think that there's success everywhere, right? They couldn't be further from the truth. So what are you really trying to do? You're trying to be a good person and cut through and win, but have the respect of the founder and the other investors, because the next company, maybe that founder is going to fail with you the first time you give them money, but they were a good person. They were high integrity. They communicated well with you. They tried their best. The next company could be the next one. That could be the one. And by the way, this happens a lot with first-time founders. Maybe it was a failed exit or like a 1x. The next one is like $22 billion company. But that founder wants to take money from you again because it's like, you know what? You saw me before anyone saw me. I trust you. I like you. I'm sorry I fucked up the first time, but I want to do it again if you let me, like, if I can raise more money from you. Like, so this is a lot of the VCs play the long game, Harvey, which is I'm making a lot of bets with people and I want a good relationship with them because I know they're going to start something else. Or by the way, what if that founder basically failed, but then he became the head of procurement at OpenAI, right? He went to go become a full-time job somewhere. Maybe he's going to buy my next company from me, right? So keeping a good relationship matters in VC and in entrepreneurship. You don't want to burn bridges, and you don't know where those people are going to be. They could become a VC one day. They could buy your company. They could just create the next one. but it is a world rife. It's by design, it's high risk, high reward, but it's also high failure rate.
I think it's a point I've never really publicly heard before you just brought it up with regard to saying you have an Andreessen Horowitz or you have any other, gold standard company you can think of. And although that company in the whole has had the Stripes or the Netflix or, whatever they've had that are really successful, it doesn't necessarily mean that every employee of that company is going to do really well. I actually had an example of this the other day. So I'm currently recruiting for like sales and trading internships. Okay, let's say one of those companies is a tier A company and the other one is a tier C company. So, A is the biggest, the best, it's got the biggest market cap, it's the most well heard of, the people from it end up going to do the most amazing things in the world. The tier C company, on the other hand, it's like decent, but it's not as big. It hasn't had as big of a track record. It's more of a competitor. It was trying to compete with the biggest ones. But realistically, even if you ask the people working there, it's probably never going to be the A tier. But I spoke to someone in the C tier, and they were, I think they were like a director or an MD or someone really high up, and they'd had experiences working at other A tier firms. Obviously, had moved there maybe for a higher role or some form of opportunity or promotion. So they're now at the tier C business, and they were explaining to me how they go about growing their teams. And they've been getting all these deals. They had the big name, they had the A tier name. They get the biggest deals. In this case, it was in trading, but you can apply the exact same thing to venture capital. They got all the biggest companies, raised them the most amount of money. And although the tier C business has the same amount of money, can do the same amount of deals as the tier A, what he found was that people were still just choosing the tier A company for the sake of it. Even if they had had an amazing relationship for 10 years plus and had done everything together, simply based off of that brand name, they seemingly went to the tier A company versus the tier C. And so they would actually have to work a lot harder to show not only is my company great, but I'm great and I'm going to do it. To what extent have you found this to be true, that you've worked with great companies or what appear to be great potential partners, but the people there aren't actually as talented or as good as potentially some other companies that you've worked with?
All the time. I mean, first of all, brand halo is a deal. It's real, right? If you're at a hot company or you're at a company that's unknown, but you're backed by a hot VC, it could take you places for sure. In PR, we see it all the time. But big companies, right? I'd be the surprising one of the big tech companies, I would say, like the FANG companies. The older they are, the more the A people have left, right? As an example, you look at a hot company, the most talented people come in. They're sort of Series B to IPO, right? That's when a lot of the financial delta value is created. And then it goes from there, but then it becomes an institutional business. Then you see those people leaving. They leave to go to the next hot company, or they become a VC, or they retire, right? Like that next phase of those employees, they may be at the same brand, but they also may not be they may be the B team. So as a business evolves over years and years and years, then those people are the C team and then the D team, right? It just happens because there's just less upside at some of those companies, or the businesses themselves are so established, you don't need to pay a 10Xer to do the work anymore. You can just get by with someone who's decent, but knows how to just make sure it doesn't fail. Does that make sense? So like,
makes sense.
Brand does play a role. And like, actually, I'll tell you a different point of view. I learned this lesson the wrong way. A founder came out of a very sexy brand that you and I both know. And initially I was like, hell yeah, we got to invest in this one. This is great. This guy is peeled out of here. Then I went to one of our mentors. I said, hey, we did this deal. He said, how long was that person at that company? I said, let me look it up. Oh, they were there 12 years. He's like, that's terrible. I said, anybody that's at that company for 12 years has no ambition. I was like, fuck. And I don't know, the jury's still out, but the point is like the brand, there's so much more nuance to the brand. How long were you at the brand? At what point did you join that brand? How much of it were you part of the value creation, or did you just stamp your name there? That's a really big deal. And it happens a lot in PR too, right? We see people that want to start PR firms that come out of Stripe, or they come out of somewhere. They have good relationships, but then they have to go work for a startup client that has nothing cool like Stripe, right? And then they can't get press coverage because they were always used to just getting press every time they just opened their mouth. but now they've got to fight and claw for it. So it's a different mentality. I like working with people that have had to work on really shitty brands and made them kind of interesting, right? I mean, then I'm like, damn, I know you worked hard on that. Like I could tell what you did there. That's hard. You have to once you only get into business. By the way, it's like a top sales guy at the tier C company. You're like, that person could make 10x at the other one. That's respect, right? It's by the way, it's like college football, NIL. I'm going to get this quarterback from this D2 team who's putting up the big numbers. Let me plug him in at Duke. He's going to be great, right? Like, so like it's in every world we see it in is that the brand can be a mirage. I'll put it that way.
Why do you think attention is important, and why are we now seeing the rise of VCs creating the likes of the All In podcast and the Scott Galloway podcast, and developing large followings on platforms like X?
I think that this has partially to do with the decline of organized religion. I believe this secular world we live in, everybody's looking for guidance, and partially due to the fact that these devices have become so good at entertaining ourselves and creating information. But at the same time, as religion has gone down and the reading of physical books, the rise of content creators and influencers and podcasters has gone up. And it's all coinciding at the same time. People are looking for someone to believe in, and either that aligns with their beliefs or they want to learn from. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of positivity to this. I think financial literacy has exploded in America because people are getting real advice from people on social media about compounding interest and saving. We never learned that in America. There's no book for it. There's nothing in high school, maybe not even in college. So there's a lot of things that we're learning about because of this rise. And I think that we are in an attention economy now where traditional advertising, by the way, doesn't work. I don't remember the last time I reacted to an ad and bought something that I saw on TV. And we are buying people. We're buying into people themselves. Just like a VC is backing a founder. Usually it's backing one person who has an idea. The LP is backing the VC by the people, not just the brand. And it just goes on and on and on. We're investing in people either with our time or our money.
Something I heard, and I think I may have talked to you about this before on the All In podcast, is, we built the systems. We built I didn't, but they built the Apples, they built the Microsofts, they built the operating systems, and then they built the apps, they built the Instagrams, the Facebooks, the Twitters, and now they're building the creators on those apps. So you had the Apple, the Microsoft, users, tons of money, the Instagram, the Facebook, the X, users, tons of money, creators, now there's tons of users, and now the money side is coming as well. And that's why you've got, as you just mentioned, the rise of NIL.
100%. I think Jamak mentioned this too. I think sometimes some of these guys were looking to invest in something like Mr. Beast, right? And that was like a crazy idea 5 years ago. That's how they were already thinking. It's very similar to what you're also seeing with how any structure works. AI, you're starting with the models, and then the infrastructure, then you're going to get to the apps, and it's going to go on and on. And then it'll be creators. There'll be AI celebrities that were actually just artificial, that will be built, that won't be humans. So I think you're right. And where does this all go? It goes to a point where we're going to get micro mentored by thousands of teachers all the time. It used to be you go to one church and hear from the pastor. Right now we're being influenced by thousands of people, and for each niche part of our life, and continuously evolving as human species, and then looking for new people that match our needs. Hey, when I'm 45, I have different needs than when I was 35, than when I was 25, going to nightclubs. At every different phase, I want different people to help me navigate that moment. That's why I think there's going to be all this opportunity for attention economy companies or people.
How do you go about telling a good story?
I think the first part of being a good storyteller is being funny. I really think this, like I learned this from my sisters, and they're always like telling jokes. And even from the old days, I'm sure back to my heritage in India, the storytellers make people laugh, right? And so you learn how to tell good stories when you're young. You can make your friends laugh. You can make your college buddies laugh. You can make your workmates laugh. Those, to me, storytelling comes from humor, and some of it comes from self-deprecation. I think you have to be humble, and often the stories about the mistake you've made. I think those are the best storytellers, in my opinion. Other people will argue that you should tell a story about a future that you see or a truth that you know that is a fact that most people see the opposite around. And that's the source of a good content clip or something. But I'd say it all comes back to really finding humor. And I think this is the core of good storytelling. That's why comedians are the best storytellers, because they bring out things that we all understand, but maybe no one's ever vocalized, right? The inner sense of who we are. That I think that's where storytelling is derived.
What do you see? I think you've talked about the current state, but how do you see the venture capital landscape evolving over the next 10 years?
First of all, some of it's going to be automated. The ability to find companies, ask questions with AI agents, due diligence, check in with the founders on what their needs are, automatically send out updates, ping enterprise customers on LinkedIn for them. I think AI is coming, and the smart venture firms are actually building the AI. One of them actually said to me, they're like, Vijay, we're doing this now because I'm going to be out of a job on Fund 5, right? Like, it's going to be the AI doing a lot of this work. I was like fascinating to hear that. I don't think that's true about every VC. There's so much human touch to these businesses and guidance and things like that. So I think that there's always going to, I think early stage VC will be a craft, right? It'll just be interesting builders and storytellers and salespeople and engineers that are going to tinker around and make things and see what can take off. I think the later stages of venture capital are going to start looking more like other financial institutions, whether it's private equity firms or sort of ETFs in some cases. I've seen that already. Like, there's some funds that invest in every climate tech company out there, and they're creating an index. So I think venture is going to change based on how early it is and how much can be automated versus what becomes a commodity. So I think there's a lot of exciting changes coming. Also, let's keep this in mind. Venture capital is still constrained to a couple of countries in the world. I'm hoping that the future of VC is that we see more capital that can go to great entrepreneurs that are in Africa and different parts of Europe and Asia that just don't have any access, or like very few companies get funded. Like, look at Australia. I mean, what a brilliant talent pool, but so few VCs, right? So I feel like, again, we read about it like it's everywhere, but it's not everywhere. It's only in like 3 or 4 cities in America and 2 or 3 international cities. So I think we got to figure out a way to democratize access to capital.
Do you think AI is helpful for democracy and democratizing society and helping, the individuals? Or, as you mentioned, do you think it's kicking people out the job and it benefits the institutions and those with the money?
This is like another question that keeps me up at night all the time. I think a couple things can be true. Both of those things could happen. I believe that AI will not replace humans, but humans plus AI will replace humans. That I believe. And so the more we can get children to play with these tools, not ban them, try them, use them in their workflow, still understand core frameworks of philosophy and writing and communication, but then use these tools to become superhuman. That is the future. And we're going to have to adopt AI everywhere. We're going to have to adopt it in universities, high schools. We have to adopt it in government, how government procures contracts, how government communicates. There should be a lot more AI coming everywhere. So I think it will democratize. I mean, it's a question back to you also. Do you think that the cell phone has democratized economies around the world?
I think it has. I don't think just the iPhone, but I think even like the MacBook and the laptop, giving people access to technology. Like, I went to South Africa in 2019 and you had like these, I think they're called shanty towns. I don't know if that's offensive, but these like little tiny houses, but they actually had like the cell disc receivers for television. So I think the fact that the average person can now have some form of smartphone, some form of smart device and television, not only in building a business, like some people use Shopify or create content. I still feel like it's a minority, but I think the access to information, I think, democratizes technology for everyone. And so I think it is a beneficial part of life, even though I know the data goes to the institutions and bigger wealth divide and whatnot. But I think on the whole, it is a beneficial thing for society.
And I think that's with responsibility. I think we could see the same thing with AI. And I truly believe in the long run, it will be a net positive. but we have to do it in a way that doesn't create massive job displacement quickly, or else we're going to have bigger issues to deal with. But I do think that we're on the right path. I do think that we have people that are thoughtful about it, and we can debate it and have a lot of controversy, but that's healthy, right? We should be thinking about how to do it in a way. Also, in the end of the day, like let's just say you're an oligarch here and you run one of these AI companies. If you displace everybody, then who's going to buy your product, right? Like who's going to buy things on Amazon? Who's going to buy a Tesla? You're going to run out of a market if you displace everybody. So there's no incentive for that.
You might not need. I don't know. I think the problem with AI versus any other wave of technological innovation, you look at like cars and then electric cars, the rise of personal laptops, the rise of personal phones, other smart devices, cameras, anything you can think of, the light bulb versus the candle. They're innovations that help people and make money and displace jobs, which is obviously sad, but innovation is innovation, and that's what drives our economy through capitalism. But I think having seen a lot of sci-fi films, and I'm sure everyone has these pictures in their minds, is I think there's this threat that AI could not only displace jobs, but could actually be a threat to national and international security. Because even the heads of these companies, maybe I'm wrong in saying this, but I don't think they truly know what they're creating. Because if you create an algorithm which can duplicate itself, figure out what happened wrong, and then improve quicker at the rate in which humans can get something wrong and improve, and we are only alive, give us max 100 years at a time, we're then babies and have to learn again. Whereas technology can just constantly improve. I think that's where you have a danger zone. And so I do think in the next 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years, innovation is always slower than we think it's going to be. But there is that danger that something happens. I was having this conversation in class yesterday that innovation always beats policy. Like they still haven't made policy around cryptocurrency. So you've got Donald Trump and Melania Trump putting out crypto coins. Like, how is that not a conflict of interest? But yet the policymakers in AI, I think, need to be ahead of the curve. I don't trust, no offense to him, I don't trust Sam Altman deciding what happens with AI when he's creating a beast, or Elon Musk, they're creating these beasts that they can't even control, that could have catastrophic and irreversible consequences on all human civilization. And I don't think they could disagree with that either.
It's fascinating. I don't disagree with you. I think their philosophy is if we don't do it, China will, or some other country will. So you're right. We're racing to an unknown future, but we need to be first. That seems like what I'm hearing from these leaders is we don't know, but what if they do it first and then we're not in it? And what if we are the victims of it? Or what if we get taken over because of it? And that's how they're convincing politicians to get on board. And that's how they're convincing constituents. But look, the average American still doesn't know a lot of what we're talking about yet, right? This is still a very new concept. And so this election was won because a lot of people were upset with the price of eggs and groceries in swing states. And we're not talking about any of that stuff in this new term right yet. We're talking about crypto. We're talking about AI funds. We're talking about big tech barons that are right behind the president. It's not really what the voters wanted us to focus on first, right? Or the government to focus on first, but it's what the biggest donors want to focus on first. So there could be a reckoning with society if they're not seeing that their life improves as a result of these policies and technologies. We don't know yet. I mean, Bernie Sanders may be the one that comes out of this the best because he was always for the people and we pushed universal basic income faster. Actually, universal basic income was an experiment that Sam Altman also funded in Oakland to see how it worked. So they were already realizing a little bit about what's coming and starting to figure out how that should work. I think what that experiment proved, though, was it didn't really make people's lives that much better. And people did appreciate having a job and having the meaning that comes with a job. That's an interesting insight based on an experiment that was run.
Yeah, I do see it as being the next sort of nuclear arms race. I mean, I watched Oppenheimer and it kind of gives me similar vibes. I want to ask 3 final quick questions. First one being, if you were to look back and someone was to ask, what was Vijay like in 100 years' time, what would you want them to say?
Funny.
Okay. My penultimate question is, what is next for you?
You know, keep building companies, keep working with founders. I think that's the one thing I know. And whether the thing that is built changes over time, I just want to be around the action. I want to be in the room where it happens. I want to be helpful. That's been my whole philosophy since I started to now is I may not be the one that always comes up with the newest technology, but at least if with enough mind melding, I can help that thing take off or go somewhere that maybe it wasn't thinking about going. And so being around smart people is pretty much my goal. If I'm around smart people, I feel like things make me happy, right? And who knows where it all goes. But that's what I've been living my life like that, Harvey, since I was like 15, is I just gravitate to funny and smart people and let the rest take care of itself.
Made me think of that Hamilton like song. I want to be in the room where it happens. That made me. I thought that was quite funny. My final question, and I ask this to every guest on Personable, is what is one thing that you would want a listener to take away from this episode?
Start early, fail fast, be humble.
Thank you. It's been beyond an honor to be able to talk to you today. I think when I started this podcast, I wanted to refrain away from people in the VC and investment space because and entrepreneurs, because that's the type of people I spoke to in high school. And I feared that by, talking to similar people that I'd get the same stories. And you're now, I think, the fourth or fifth venture capital PE person I've spoken to. And every time I've had a completely different and interesting conversation. I think it's fascinating the intersection that you're at between raising venture capital and telling the story behind it. I was actually having a conversation with some friends today about like Warren Buffett, being one of the biggest and best storytellers on the planet. And you've got Steve Jobs that says the true geniuses and the true people that are going to make an impact on the planet are the storytellers. And so at first glance, someone might not understand the gravitas and the importance of a PR firm, of a storyteller behind a business, behind a founder, in raising money and selling product and getting customers. But I think you understand that. And I think continually as we get into this social media era where VCs themselves actually have a voice and they're not the ones just putting money into things and letting them have a voice, where they have their own voice, I think great things will happen. And I can certainly see you at the front of it. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Harvey. Appreciate it. Appreciate what you're doing too. It's important that more young people realize the power of being creators and getting out there and building their own brands and asking interesting questions and learning via podcasting.